I listen to a lot of scary stories online, and there seem to be a lot of them that take place out in the country. However, most of them seem to all be when someone is out hiking or walking along some long road. Sometimes it's someone driving down dark country back roads. But I grew up in the country, and I know you didn't need to go any further than your own home or the home of your relatives to encounter something scary. Sometimes the scariest things can happen right from your own house. This happened quite a while ago. So long ago, in fact, that I don't remember my age exactly, but I do know I was pretty young, and I'm in my 70s now. I know that I was under 10 years old. In the area I grew up in, which was very, very rural, people spent a lot of time with their families and extended families, and even though my parents and my siblings lived way out in the country, my grandparents lived in a much more rural area. I tend to think that if my grandparents were still alive today, and they saw the technology advancements we've achieved over the years, they'd probably have a heart attack. Now, while my grandparents didn't have an actual farm, they did have a garden and some farm animals. They had chickens, dogs, cats, and even a goat. I was very used to having goat's milk whenever I was over at their place. The first time one of my kids had goat's milk, and we told her what it was, she ran out of the room crying. But for my age and where we lived, it was quite normal. So, what was their house like? Small. It was a shack, basically. There were a couple of rooms, a bedroom for the parents, one for the kids, a kitchen, and a small living room. There was an outhouse out back, a very small barn for the animals, a chicken coop, and a shed. On one occasion, I remember being over there. My parents had to go out on a drive, and would be gone for nearly a week or so. They took us over there so that my grandparents could watch us. It was me and two of my sisters. I have more siblings as well, but they weren't born yet at this time. I was always a bit scared at night when I was at my grandparents' house, and this was for several reasons. First off, it was much darker over there than it was at our place. I mean, it was extremely dark outside. I haven't really experienced that kind of darkness basically anywhere else since in my entire life. So I avoided getting up in the middle of the night and going over to the outhouse, because that was just an absolutely terrifying experience. The other reason I was scared was because of the shack itself. It had extremely thin walls, basically just boards to be honest, and it seemed like something dangerous. The monsters that I believed in back when I was young, or the scary people who might want to hurt me, wouldn't have too much of a problem getting into that shack. So that was really terrifying as well. My grandparents, being pretty old at the time, absolutely went to bed earlier than any of the kids did. Or, more accurately, went to sleep. We had to be in bed then too, but of course we wouldn't fall asleep nearly as early as they did. We would stay up and talk and eventually drift off. This night was a bit scarier than most. It was very windy outside, so of course the shack gave no insulation from the wind and weather. The three of us were all curled up in one bed together, listening to the wind hitting the walls of the building. And believe me, the wind shook that shack quite a bit. We were all laying there in the feather bed underneath a quilt, and we were all scared, but at least we were together, so that made it easier to endure. The wind was frightening, and it was keeping us from being able to go to sleep. But then I heard something. I couldn't tell what it was from the sound of the wind being stronger than it, but it was a sound that seemed like it didn't belong. While the wind kept shaking the house, I heard it once again, and I recognized it the second time. I turned to my sisters and asked, "Hey, do you hear the goat bleeding?" They hadn't, but after a while listening, they both eventually heard it too. I don't know if you know much about goats, but they aren't supposed to do that at nighttime, and this goat sounded distressed about something. That just made us kids even more scared. I mean, you know how the imagination of children can be pretty intense to begin with. We were scared enough with just the violence of the wind that this bleating of a distressed goat only made everything that much more elevated. We thought that if we were hearing the goat, then possibly our grandparents would hear it too, and after a while that seemed to be the case. We heard our grandfather get up and heard him walking around. After a few moments, we heard the door to the shack open and close. Over the wind, we were able to hear our grandpa arguing with someone. We couldn't make out who it was he was fighting with, but after a while, we heard our grandfather scream, and then heard what sounded like a shotgun blast. We were terrified, but we didn't know what to do. We just held each other there in bed. Our grandma went outside, and she was screaming hysterically. She brought my grandpa into the house. At no time did they come in and talk to us, but we hadn't expected them to either. We did find out later what happened when they told our mom. Apparently a neighbor had come over in the middle of the night and was trying to steal chickens from the coop. My grandfather confronted him, at which point the man stabbed him. He shot at the guy, who then fled. Fortunately, my grandpa didn't die or anything like that. My sisters and I were so scared, though. It was a terrifying night that we never forgot. This is sort of a lesson that you should probably listen to people who warn you against doing things. My family is from the southern Ohio area, and in fact I have so many cousins and such that I don't even know all of them. It seems like I'm always being introduced to some new cousin or family member that I never even knew I had. Although I don't live in that area, we do go there every year for Easter. This year it was just me and my mom who went, and it was to visit her parents. We took my car, which is a first, because I had never made a long drive in my car like that before, and I was more than ready to do it for a first time. Still, though, my mom ended up doing most of the driving. The good thing was, though, that I didn't feel like I was being restricted to being at home all of the time by myself. On one of the first days I was there, we were in the town of Ironton. We stopped at a gas station, and there was a guy there that I had never met before. My mom was talking to him, and he was asking her for a ride. I could tell right away that my mom was not comfortable with the idea of giving this guy a ride. I heard her tell him that we were not going to go all the way to his destination, as we were crossing the bridge and going into Kentucky. He was off to the town of South Point, which was in Ohio, so at least we gave him a ride to the bridge. My mom was driving, so he sat down beside me. He was a second cousin to my mom. We'll call him Tom. I don't know exactly what that makes him to me, but he was absolutely drunk or high or something. After we dropped him off, my mom told me not to mention it to my grandma when we got home. Like quite a lot of our relatives, he was a heavy drug user who it seemed had spent time in jail and other things like that. Basically, she didn't even want to give him the short ride to the bridge either, but she has a problem with saying no. A few days later, I was getting bored of being there. All my relatives do is talk about the same memories over and over again, so I decided I had to go out. I went out to get something to drink and had to cross over into Ohio because the Kentucky county there was a dry one. While I was at the liquor store, I happened to see that guy Tom was hanging out there as well. I tried not to pay much attention to him, but he just kept zoning in on me, and it took him a few moments, but after a while, he obviously recognized me. At that point, he began to walk over and talk to me. I could tell where this was going too. He was talking about how he had been out partying with some friends, much like he had the previous time I had seen him, and had gotten himself stranded once again. I knew this would lead around to him asking me for a ride at some point, and unlike my mom, I really wasn't the best at telling someone no. I also realized, though, that I had been bored, so maybe a nice ride out of the area, which I didn't know very well, would be exactly what I would need. I had never driven down there at all, and had actually lived in South Point when I was 14, so I thought it could be a nice idea. I decided to let him have a little ride. Honestly, I did feel slightly uncomfortable with the guy. He seemed nice enough, but he was either drunk or stoned all the time. I really couldn't tell which. I assumed that he lived in town, but instead he had me take a side road that led into the hills of the area. I then figured he may have lived out in the country, as it was likely cheaper for him to do so, although it did make me wonder how he kept wandering his way into town. He had me take a road that then took me up onto the hill. I was nervous for several reasons. It was dark now, the road was extremely narrow, and I had never driven in such an area before. When we eventually arrived at the place I was taking him to, it was an old and dilapidated trailer sitting in a lot just off the road. He thanked me for the ride and hopped out of the car. I have this thing that when I give someone a ride, I like to remain behind and watch them go into the house, so I did just that. Tom walked into the house and closed the door. I started to back up. I was looking over my shoulder, just getting out of the driveway, when suddenly there was a huge bang and screaming. My eyes shot forward to look at the trailer. Tom was lying on the ground in front of it. Standing over him was a woman, and in her hand she was holding a knife. She was advancing on him. At first, I didn't know what to do. It was such a bizarre thing to see. However, I also knew that I needed to do something, or I might just be here witnessing a death. The woman descended upon Tom. I reached under the seat of my car and grabbed the cross I used to change tires. It was a weird weapon choice, I'll admit, but it was the only thing I had. I went toward the woman who stabbed Tom with a knife. She looked up at me and saw me advancing on her. She quit stabbing Tom and hopped up, locking herself back into the trailer. I grabbed Tom up and helped him into my car. I knew I had to get him to a hospital. I tried to talk to him along the way, but he was pretty fucked up. I was scared driving up that hill to the trailer, but that was nothing like how scared I was going back down to the hospital. Fortunately, somehow, I managed to get him there in time. I guess the lady who owned the trailer was his girlfriend. She was pissed at him for coming home one time too many late, so she attacked him. I had a lot of fun explaining what happened to my mom. I was bullied really bad when I was growing up. I grew up in a really rural area. Often when I tell my friends about what I had to go through when I was younger, they're generally quite shocked. They can't believe that any school or place would allow a kid to be as blatantly picked on as I was. I was constantly being forced into fights, and I didn't like fighting, so I would often just not engage. Of course, everyone assumed that this meant I was a chicken, so that just made the bullying even worse. But I really wasn't as scared, as I was just not the type of person who got anything out of fighting. Anyway, I didn't really care a whole lot at the time. I lived far from the school and really far from other students. Out in the country, the closest people to me were an elderly couple, and it took at least 30 minutes worth of walking just to get to their house. I would go a lot too, because they would give me cookies and other nice things like that. I also quite liked talking to them. I could just listen to old people tell me stories all day long. During the summer, I spent quite a bit of time over at their home. I got to hear a great bunch of stories from them. A few nights, since they were not the type of seniors who always went to bed early, I stayed up pretty late in the night just talking with them. When I left, I would make the walk home, which I mentioned was at least a half-hour walk. My parents were usually long in bed by that time, and it so happened that one night I had a pretty scary encounter. I was at the house of these beloved seniors. Hell, I can still taste the great cookies that lady of the house had made for me, but I was there pretty late that night, and we lost all track of time. The husband happened to be a war veteran, and when he began talking about those stories, he absolutely would go on and on. Not that I minded, of course. After they went to bed, I set out on the walk home. I was still a bit restless at the time, though, and wasn't looking forward to just going home and sleeping, so I decided to sort of circle around and take the longer way to get home. It was a beautiful night. Very hot out, but there was a cool breeze as well. The moon was out and the cloud cover was minimal, so I could see a lot of stars in the sky. Looking off into the distance, I saw a small red light. It was extremely tiny and very faint, just a bit up the road from me. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't too concerned about it. I was actually really curious. The light moved a little bit, quick and flickering movements, and as I walked closer and closer to its direction, It walked closer and closer to mine. It was when it looked like it was tossed onto the side of the road that I realized it was a cigarette and that someone was out and walking towards me. Well, when they got closer, I noticed that they were kids from school that I knew, and they were kids from school that bullied me. I wasn't able to get away without them noticing me though, and when they did, they began laughing and calling me names. I tried to walk past them and ignore them, but one of them tripped me, and I landed on my face. I tried to get up, and when I did, I looked back at the guys. One of them took out a pocket knife and slowly opened the blade, grinning at me. I jumped to my feet and quickly went running down the road. They chased me for a while without catching me. I wasn't sure they were really trying. They were probably just trying to frighten me, but it worked. When I finally quit running, I turned around, and they were still standing just a bit off in the distance. One of them shouted out to me, "I'll be waiting for you at school." It was a scary thing to even think about. I was scared that something bad would happen to me when I returned. I dreaded it, but I also dreaded going outside because I kept thinking I would run into them again. They never actually hurt me with a knife, but the fear they caused me was quite real. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. That sort of stuff really helps me out with the audience engagement and really helps my videos get out to a lot more people. So hopefully we can get to that 1 million one day. Help me out guys, that'd be great. Once again, starting this week on the second channel, we're going to be doing some true crime stuff, probably twice a week if I feel in the mood for it, and feel like doing all the research required. Those will be on Wednesdays/Thursdays and Saturdays/Sundays probably. So look forward to that if you're interested. There's a link to my second channel in the description. The name is Mr. Blue Sky, so keep an eye out for that. If you guys feel like contacting me for any reason, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please make sure that it has proper grammar, and try to include as much detail as possible so it's long enough for me to include in a video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, if it has one, what type of story it is, if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the art used in this video, links to my artist, Alan, will be in the description below. He does a lot of horror art stuff, and he's really good at it. He also does commissions, so if you guys have any projects you want to work on or something, please be sure to check him out. He can probably get you something really good. As usual, links to the music used in the video will be in the description below in the order which it appears. I think that's pretty much all for now, guys, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.